In today's video, I want to talk about a new way that I've been thinking about approaching my oil paintings and how that can help you, whether you're an experienced painter looking for a breakthrough or a beginner who simply wants to learn to paint in oil without needless frustration. I recently took on a commission that I knew would be an enjoyable painting without a lot of stress. It was, it was this portrait of a horse, which I generally feel very confident about painting. But despite blocking the horse in quickly and easily, I felt blocked about finishing the painting and I couldn't figure out why. It wasn't until my final day of working on this piece that I figured out what had held me back up until that point, and how really it breaks down into 5 steps that you can use to set yourself up for success when painting. So while I paint away on this time lapse, let's talk about these 5 steps. The overarching theme of these steps is pretty simple. You want to set yourself up for success by fully planning your pieces before you ever start. To this end, I divide my pieces into, I would say, 2 parts. Planning, which includes composition, and then visual translation. The reason for dividing the process into these 2 stages is that by the time you're putting paint on canvas, you really don't want a reason to doubt anything that you're doing. In my experience, this is when we start to feel blocked or anxious about the painting, or we get into the trap of painting and repainting sections. But if you're able to plan in such a way that you begin painting already knowing exactly what you're going to do, you avoid basically this entire pitfall. Let's say, for instance, that you're painting a portrait, but you really don't like the model's outfit, despite loving the model and their pose. If you dive into the painting, you may work a bit more tentatively and slowly because you haven't decided what sort of outfit you want to see on her, and you aren't sure if the new outfit will look good or what color will bounce into the couch the model is sitting on. So now you don't want to paint the couch either, and oh wait, some color is bouncing back into the model's chin, until you just don't want to paint anything anymore. Not to mention, inventing things on the fly takes a lot more mental energy and processing time. Okay, how about an even worse example? So you go ahead and change the outfit as you go, except halfway through you realize the color just does not work with your composition, and now you have to paint it all over. So you're not only painting more slowly, you actually have to double the work because you have to paint it all over again. To avoid this, by the time I sit down to paint, I want my full composition worked out. So I think first about arranging my reference. And by the way, reference can mean your model, your still life, landscape, or a photo. And I'm going to use all of these interchangeably here. I'm putting just as much in as I would when painting, if not more, during this process. The goal is that by the time I'm done curating, arranging, and lighting the scene I want to paint, all I have to do is copy. Sure, I may have some decisions about mark making or edges when I am painting, but all in all, the drawing, values, and color, and a lot of the edges have really already been decided. We like to give copying a bad rap, but really that's what the best artists are doing, and what we love praising them for. We aren't copying here like we're stealing someone's homework, which I think is where part of the negative connotation comes from. We also aren't copying like cameras or printers either. The very act of painting is about simplifying an image and pushing and pulling on certain elements we're drawn to help guide the viewer to what we want them to see. I think a better word because of this is probably translation or visual translation. So as painters, we are visually translating a 3-dimensional reference into a 2-dimensional painting. So if you paint scenes that just aren't striking to you, or you struggle with painting and repainting the same image, the issue probably isn't your painting technique. It's that perhaps you aren't viewing composition as a skill unto itself. I'll give an example. I have a student who came to me because she loved my use of light in my paintings. She creates work that's really beautiful and she puts a lot of care into what she does. but she didn't have a strong sense of light coming through, and that's what she really wanted to focus on. So I asked to see what she painted from and took a look at the photo references she used for her paintings. And I saw that her paintings really look just like the photos. Rather than talking about the way that she paints, I instead talked at length about choosing references that would set her up for success and showed her that for every painting I have with striking light, I also have a reference with striking light. It can be time-consuming to create or find these references, but in the end, we save time when it comes to painting, and we're much more likely to come away with a piece that we're pleased with. So here's how I take this principle and break it down into steps. Steps 1 through 4 have absolutely nothing to do with your paints or your brushes or your canvas, as you'll see here in a minute. So step 1 is to compose an image you're excited about. This can mean setting up a still life, posing your model, or picking the right landscape. As much as you're able to move items around or change your position relative to them, do it here until you're happy. Step 2 is to light your composition in a way that excites you. Once all of the objects in your composition are in the right place, you're at the right angle to them, arrange your lighting in a way that elevates everything to that next level. Step 3 is review. This is your painting. Even though you haven't put a single brush stroke down, if you aren't excited about the composition now, you probably won't be when there's paint on the canvas. So if you aren't satisfied yet, go back to step 1 and repeat until you return to this stage. It's okay if you have to go through this process several times. I actually heard about this for the first time with Daniel Keyes. I asked him how long he took to set up still life because it was something I was really struggling with. And I found out that the way he sees it, the hardest part of the painting is setting up the still life itself. Once that's done, putting paint to canvas, that's the easy part. So don't be discouraged if you have to repeat this quite a few times or if this is really time consuming. In my opinion, this is perhaps the hardest part of this entire process. And be forgiving. Give yourself time to learn. If you want to play with abstraction, mock it up. Create a small study or thumbnail or snap a photo and play with it in Photoshop. Do this until the composition of the abstract elements has you just as excited as the representational elements. And then finally, step 5, you're ready to sit down and translate your reference into a painting. Before I go on, I do want to make a quick note. Sometimes we don't have the luxury of rearranging a scene. So, for instance, plein air painters cannot move an inconvenient tree or force the sun to stay in a certain place all day. In these cases, it helps to really lean on the thumbnails and small studies to try out any adjustments. You can even snap a photo of the lighting just at the right moment, so you have a consistent light and shadow pattern to use when you're back at your studio and putting the finishing touches on your painting. Some advanced artists have enough experience that this isn't necessary to create a beautiful painting. In these cases, they often have painted a type of scene or model so many times that they can invent fairly confidently on the canvas itself. But they regularly fail too, and they know that that's part of the process. The reason I talked about planning ahead is that most artists I talk to who ask about my process are burnt out on creating paintings that aren't what they had hoped for. And these are the steps to help them lessen that rate of failure. Now, with the planning out of the way, I want to talk about that final step, translating what you see. This is really a full video onto itself, which I will be posting at a later date. But for today, I want to underscore that by planning your pieces, composition is handled before you sit down to paint. This only leaves components of a painting that are pure technical skill, so drawing, value, color, and edges, which aren't subject to interpretation the way that composition is. Sure, you may simplify your values or play with your edges, but by and large, these components of your painting are not subject to interpretation. At this stage, you can forego questions of creativity and focus solely on accuracy. And that's what I found myself struggling with in this painting. I wanted to be inspired by the background of my reference, but I started the painting without knowing exactly what I wanted it to look like. I had a general idea and thought the background would simply solidify in my mind as I went, but it just didn't. Instead, on that last day, I realized that I wanted to take a totally different approach. And I did wind up having to paint over all of my early background work. But this time, I made sure to plan the background out exactly in Photoshop before I resumed making any marks. And this time, the background went almost effortlessly. It may look abstract and like it should have required no thought, but the reality is that I probably poured hours into making sure that the background harmonized with the subject, brought in some of the greens and blues of the sky and pasture of the original image, and moved the eye successfully throughout the painting. So from here on out, I want to be even more mindful of this, and I want to help you with that as well. It's tempting to think that by the time I get to a certain stage in a painting that I'll know how to answer some question about how to make it look good. But that's exactly when I need to stop and put even more time into planning, which means putting the paintbrush down. It helped me out of a block this time, and I'm sure it'll help me going forward. But more importantly, I really hope this is helpful to you. If you found these steps helpful, please like this video and comment down below to tell me how you plan to apply these to your paintings or how you've encountered similar issues in the past. I always love talking to you all in the comments, so thank you. If you'd like to commission a painting like this one, I've included a link in the description, as well as links to all of the supplies that I used to create this painting. Please be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know whenever I have a new painting video to share with you, and until then, happy painting.